I'm here with Stewart Thornhill, Executive Director of IB's Pierre Allen Morissette Institute for Entrepreneurship, discussing why leadership matters when pursuing the entrepreneurial dream. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs before they launch a business?
Before launching a business, entrepreneurs need to do a couple of things. One is, I think, fundamentally a gut check. If people launch a business believing that this is going to be an easy path to riches, they're fooling themselves. It's, I would say, by far the hardest job that one can imagine. It's all-consuming. It requires almost 24/7 attention. I don't know of any successful entrepreneur that's treated it as a part-time or a casual endeavor. It is absolutely something that requires full commitment, and often that means commitment of the entire family. Spouses need to give up a bit of the time that they might otherwise get from their partner. Kids sometimes take a back seat to a venture when it's in the early stages, and the entrepreneur is often literally living at the office and trying to get from one day to the next. So as good as an idea is, or as compelling as an opportunity is, it's still going to be a ton of work. And the rule of thumb you often hear entrepreneurs and investors talk about is twice the money and 3 times the time to make something successful. And that shouldn't be underestimated, because it will put stresses on a person's life. It will require things of them that they may not know that they have themselves until they're tested. And it can be daunting. But for those who do it, who live for it, who thrive in that environment of creating something and building something, it's, the descriptions are about adrenaline rush. It's like climbing a mountain. It's like overcoming obstacles. It's work, but the reward is you get to create something. You get to bring something into the world that creates value, that gives people jobs, that enables you to be a creator, to be a builder. And that's often far more rewarding than the financial rewards, which are obviously nice, but it's that sense of independence and leadership and being able to show the world, this is what I can do and this is what I can create. Not unlike a painter or a musician who brings some new work of art or new music into the world. A new business is often like that. It's someone's cathedral, it's someone's symphony, and it's a great way to go, but it's not an easy path, and the work shouldn't be underestimated.
Why is it important to create a business plan and plan for the long term?
Well, having a plan is like setting off into a wilderness without a map. If you don't have a sense of where you're going to go, as the saying goes, any direction will do. There are lots of great ideas out there that never are successfully developed simply because people get to a certain point and don't know where to go next. If you put yourself through the mental exercise of mapping out where you're going to go, anticipating contingencies, what might go wrong, what might take you in a different direction, how are you going to guard against those things, or if they happen, what kind of contingencies do you have set up? Those are the kinds of things that a business plan will help you think through. It's an inexpensive way to test out your business idea without actually putting your money on the table. It's also a way of keeping score. So if you had planned to be at revenue level X 12 months or 18 months into the business, if you're twice that level or half that level, that's going to give you some pretty strong signals about how to adjust or modify your business. But if you didn't have a plan, if you didn't have any idea where you had hoped to be at that point in time, then you're not going to be in the same position to make those adjustments. So it's a way to stress test your idea, it's a way to evaluate it once it's going. And from a very practical point of view, nobody's going to invest in you if you don't have a plan. It comes down to a very pragmatic reason for doing one, even if neither of the 2 other reasons, which I think are great ones. But even if you don't believe in those in the plan, there's a common saying that a business plan is obsolete the second it comes off the printer, because change is so fast in the entrepreneurial world. However, not having a business plan will lead to an incredibly short conversation with an investor. They are not going to be interested. The first question is, show me your business plan. You don't have a business plan, you don't have a conversation, and you don't have an investor. So there's the practical reasons, but there's also the very useful reasons of figuring out where the business is going to go and then giving you a management tool to help guide you once you get going.
How can you create an idea and pitch that investors will notice?
Getting noticed by investors is as much art as anything else. Some people are natural showmen. Some people have a way of attracting attention to themselves, and that's a lot about creativity and sizzle. That will often get you in the door. But if you don't have that compelling value proposition, our entrepreneur in residence here at Ivy, Ron Close, often uses the phrase bleeding neck wound. If you're trying to sell a Band-Aid to somebody, if they've got a small cut in their finger or they've got a bleeding neck wound, who's going to have the greater need? The greater the need you can identify in the market, and when we talk about creating value or satisfying a need, there's almost an infinite number of ways that you can do that. If you can make someone's life, take a deep breath here, easier, faster, nicer, cheaper, better, more efficient, more convenient, nicer smelling, better looking, whatever it happens to be, if there is a way you can improve someone's life or take away a point of pain, now you've got the beginnings of a conversation. If your idea isn't one that is going to make someone's life better, easier, nicer, etc., then why would somebody take money out of their wallet and give it to you in exchange for your product or service? So identifying and articulating that need are two important skills, and they're not the same. There are lots of people who identify a need but do a poor job of communicating it, and that communication piece is every bit as important, and that's perhaps even more important when you get to that pitch and investor development stage.
What steps are critical for getting your product or service on the market?
Now, getting from an idea to getting to a product, that's where there is no magic solution. You need the money. There are very few businesses that are possible without having some capital to get it going, whether that's to develop the technology, whether it's to hire your first employees. If it's a product, obviously you need to build something, prototypes, get it tested and get it going forward. The proof is almost in the pudding, as we were discussing a second ago about that compelling need and a value proposition. There are some products that start on a very, very low scale or small scale rollout, and word of mouth takes over because people say, this is a great product, this is a great idea, this is a great service, and they tell their friends. If you can hit that magic space where people are so excited about your product that not only are they buying it themselves, but they are taking on the role of evangelist or salesman for you, then you've got something magical. The harder you have to work to educate your potential market or educate your potential clients as to why they should come from a competitor, the harder the struggle is going to be, because if it's not immediately obvious why someone would want your product or service, then it's going to be that much harder uphill. So it keeps coming back to that same fundamental thing. How great is the need that you're satisfying, and how well are you doing it?
Entrepreneurs are leaders. What leadership competencies and character traits make for a successful entrepreneur?
I'm not sure there are different traits that make entrepreneurs successful versus leaders of a large organization successful. I think the basic character traits and competencies that are associated with great leaders, you can find them in entrepreneurs and you can find them in leaders of large companies. Here in Canada, George Cope is now the CEO of Bell, a huge corporation. But George became the CEO of Bell by being a great entrepreneur. He started a cell company and then was acquired and then was moved up into the corporate ladder. George is still George, and the skills that made him a great entrepreneur are the same skills that make him a great CEO at Bell. But it's not that he needed a special set so much as he had to apply them differently. When you're growing and building an organization, you get to build and establish the culture from ground zero. There's nothing harder in an organization than changing a culture, shifting a deeply entrenched culture in an organization. So entrepreneurs, in some ways, have the advantage of being able to set that context and set that tone and the culture from ground zero. And then if it doesn't work, it's up to somebody else to come along later and try to change it. But that task is critical, and entrepreneurs, if anything, have to be very careful to make sure that the tone they set and the values that they impart to that organization are the ones that they want it to carry forward in the long term, because it's very difficult to change it once you get going in that direction, but they have that opportunity to set it and get it going. More so than in a large organization, the personal core values of the entrepreneur largely become the core values of that organization, because they, through their actions, through their deeds, through the choices they make, through the types of people they hire, they effectively bring all of their own internal values into play in the organization. And that can be an incredibly powerful thing that makes an organization great, or it can get in the way sometimes if some of those values are counter to what the organization needs to be successful. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You get to set the tone, but you then have the responsibility to set the right one.
From a behavioral point of view, how do entrepreneurs derail?
As we were discussing a second ago about the character traits and competencies of entrepreneurs, derailing as the leader of an entrepreneurial company happens for exactly the same reasons that executives, whether they're mid-level or senior or even junior managers in an organization, derail. There's a colleague we work with at TD Bank, Mary O'Hara, who used the phrase that leadership is a contact sport, and it really is. It's at arm's length. It's between individuals having conversations, and leaders in entrepreneurial companies or in large organizations who are able to have great conversations and meaningful interactions with the people they deal with are less likely to derail than the ones who aren't able to maintain those relationships and build them and communicate effectively and share their vision and be able to really be people that others want to follow. The challenge the larger an organization gets is you've got more layers and simply more people. If you think about an organization with 100,000 employees, if the leader of that organization wants to get the message of every individual in the organization, they'll never do it with a personal conversation. Entrepreneurs, particularly in the early days when it's maybe 2 employees or 20 employees or even 100 employees, can have those personal conversations. So you get to have a direct impact on a much larger proportional piece of the organization when the company's small. As it grows, that's often where entrepreneurs have trouble making the transition, is leading through others. They may be great one-on-one leaders, but when they then have to start empowering others to become the leaders, to pass the message for them, to do the job of sense-making in the organization, often they stumble, and that's where you see a lot of professional managers, if you will, come in and sometimes take over, because the entrepreneurs might be great builders and creators, but then don't have the same skills when it comes to delegating and letting others do a lot of the business of running the organization. So that's probably the most common derailment problem, is they can lead up to a certain size when they've got direct line of sight and line of touch to their people. As soon as they lose that line of sight and line of contact and have to manage through others, that's a tough transition to make.
Can entrepreneurs be developed just as leaders can be developed? And if so, what would be the pillars of such development?
Entrepreneurs, leaders, all of those labels are really describing a set of skills and behaviors. And as with any set of skills and behaviors, some of us come to the table with a better developed set than others. I honestly believe that all of the skills and behaviors that are essential to being great leaders and to being great entrepreneurs can be learned. The question then becomes, can anyone learn them? And that's where it gets down to, are you willing to learn the lessons? Are you willing to take guidance from others? Are you able to integrate and synthesize the experiences that you have in your life and turn it into future success? So on the one hand, yes, I think all the skills and behaviors can be learned, but I'm less optimistic that 100% of the people in the world can learn those skills and behaviors that have what it takes. And that's not because the skills are unlearnable, it's because some people are simply better learners than others. And that's where you often see the difference, is how capable someone is of learning from their own experiences and learning from the experiences of others.
On the CBC TV show Dragon's Den about entrepreneurship, panelist Brett Wilson is quite different in his approach to being an entrepreneur and achieving success than his fellow panelist Kevin O'Leary, yet both are successful. How do you reconcile this?
First of all, whenever I speak about the Dragon's Den or The Apprentice or the Shark's Tank or any of the popular shows that center around entrepreneurship, it's really important to be aware that these are entertainment products. These are the behaviors, the pitches, the reactions, the interactions that you see on any of those programs are designed to entertain a broad audience. So Having said that, however, Kevin and Brett represent ends of a spectrum, almost caricatures of investor types that you might run into. So I'm not going to make any assumptions that the Kevin or the Brett or the Donald Trump, for that matter, that you see in front of a camera is at all representative of their actual business practices. But for the sake of argument, Kevin represents the point of view that, going back to the Wall Street character Gordon Gekko, greed is good, and it's the fundamental priority of an investor and an entrepreneur to make money, full stop, and anything that goes beyond that is charity and should be dealt with in a separate part of your life. Whereas Brett takes the more balanced perspective that, in fact, there are other dimensions to being an entrepreneur, to creating a business, to creating value above and beyond the pursuit of the almighty dollar. That's a debate that's been around as long as there's been capitalism, and people will make their own choices, but I think it's useful to not lose sight of that conversation and not lose sight of the argument. And at the end of the day, people are going to make their own choices as to where they lie in terms of their comfort level. Do they see themselves as a Kevin? Do they see themselves as a Brett? Do they see themselves as someone else a little further along that spectrum? It's entertainment, but it's a useful conversation to have.